This episode is brought to you by Paramount Plus. If you don't already subscribe to Paramount Plus, please use our affiliate link by going to talkthroughmedia.com/Paramount Plus. Using our affiliate link gives us a little credit, which helps us to keep bringing you great content. U.S. residents only.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Talk Through. I'm Brian.
And I'm LT.
And I'm James the Augmented ECHH.
What the heck does that mean?
That is the emergency co-host hologram.
Ah, okay.
Aren't you supposed to go bing, state the nature of your co-host emergency?
Oh, we already went through that off backstage.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've got co-hosting tonight, James the Augmented Sailor, who I'm sure most of you have heard us go through his feedback over the years. And so thanks, James. I know you've guest hosted before, I think on Discovery.
Yes.
Yep. So, all right. So we will be covering season 1, episode 4 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, titled Memento Mori. And I'm coming to you from a different location tonight, or this afternoon, actually. So I don't know. I may sound different. I may sound the same. Who knows? But certainly better than I sounded in the Walking Dead talk through this week, which was over the phone. So don't complain. Anyway, before we get started, we want to remind you that we provide early access to a virtually uncensored version of the podcast that goes out, say, 24 to 36 hours after recording. We've been pretty good with that the last few weeks and not so good in getting the final episode out. So Patreons get it significantly earlier than the regular listeners. So, and complete with things like Brian getting sleepy and not James, LT singing his vocal stylings while we are trying to get things done in the background.
While Brian is asleep and while Kyle's internet drops.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that, you can get to it for as low as $1 a month. That's at patreon.com/Star Trek TTM. The old URL still works, patreon.com/Brian and Ruthie, but the new one is what we'll work on for now.
Yeah, so, come on, people. It's only $1 a month.
Exactly. Yeah, and both of you are longtime supporters of the podcast before you were ever hosts. So thank both of you for that. And all that money goes straight back into the hosting costs and everything to put together the podcast every month, like media hosting, which is a separate thing, software to put the audio together, etc. So, because that's a monthly charge. And anyway, so your support is appreciated. First, we have some additional feedback before we get into the episode on, well, usually I would say season 1, episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria, but it's on all of the episodes. So let's open hailing frequencies. All right, so first we have some errata.
Incorrect.
And I said I would get back to this. So I wanted to mention Maya Vervillo, and last week I couldn't remember what it was I wanted to say for errata, but now I do. No, it was on Maya Vervillo and what she directed before. So she first directed a short trek, was the first short trek Season 1, Episode 1, titled Runaway. That's the one with Tilly meeting, what's her name?
The
Poe?
princess. Yeah, Poe.
I think Poe.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So that was the first short trek. Then she directed 2 episodes of Disco, season 2, episode 11, Perpetual Infinity, and season 3, episode 5, titled Die Trying. And that's the one where they meet up with Federation headquarters. So, and there's all those incredible looking ships and all of that. So then she also directed season 1, episode 6 of Picard, titled The Impossible Box, and season 1, episode 8 of Picard, Broken Pieces. And then, of course, season 1, episode 2 of this show, Strange New Worlds, Children of the Comet. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say last time, or 2 weeks ago. All right. So unless LT, you have anything you wanted to mention, we'll go into feedback. And we should say that at the time of recording, season 1, episode 3 has been released to Patreons, but not to everyone else. So so we haven't gotten a lot of feedback on that episode yet, but we did get a little bit of feedback on the rest of it. So that came in after. Okay, so we got some feedback on the first episode, season 1, episode 1, Strange New Worlds. LT, why don't you read this one?
I shall. And it's from Brian from Colorado. And he starts, I've finally gotten around to typing up my notes. Wow, what a great premiere for Strange New Worlds. I rate it 9.6 out of 10 communicator iPod docks. And he says, yeses. The cold open first contact scene was well done. I love the opening credits and the theme song, especially the last few notes that evoke the TOS theme. I enjoyed that Pike was watching the Day the Earth Stood Still movie, and later in the episode he riffed off of old sci-fi movies and said, take me to your leader. T'Pring looks very much like the actor from TOS, although she didn't act very Vulcan-like. The other starship being named the Archer made me smile. Everything about the Enterprise aesthetic was fun to behold. I think they nailed the balance of having it look like it could exist in the same universe as Discovery and TOS. Spock's line...
I would agree with that. And I also agree with what you said, Brian, about T'Pring. She looks like the old actor, but didn't act it. So
not a bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Spock's line, Captain, where are my pants? Was hilarious, and of course it makes me think of the Lego movie. Me too, Brian. I thought Pike's little PowerPoint presentation about Earth's great wars were powerful and sobering. The montage of the alien society reactions to first contact with Pike's crew was so positive and uplifting, epitomizing what Star Trek is all about. Uhura in the turbo lift making small talk with the runaway alien showcased her communication skills. I think this episode did a good job introducing viewers to the crew, such as Ortegas and Mobenga, and we even got to see Jupiter Station. He goes on to his nose. He says the entire Vulcan mating scene seemed unrealistic and unneeded. I don't think either of them was in Pon farr, but it wasn't explained why they were behaving more like humans. The eye-salve transporter putting the DNA on or in Spock's eyes was a no for me too. Cool idea, but weakly explained. By far, my biggest no was Nurse Chapel. Although I like the character herself and look forward to more, nothing about her at all seems like Nurse Chapel to me. The Nurse Chapel we knew wasn't a thrill-seeking, somewhat dark sense of humor kind of person. She was level-headed, professional, and fairly subdued. I know we have close to a decade until this person matures to be the Nurse Chapel we knew on TOS, but I just don't think the personality is at all similar. They should have given her a different name and had her be a new character altogether. So then he goes to his not good enoughs. He says, why does the USS Archer have only 3 crew members and 2 of them are astrophysicists? This is a huge not good enough. There was a mention of Kelpian warp ships too, and that doesn't make sense at this point in history unless they meant the Baul instead. Another minor not good enough for me was introducing Lon Noonien-Singh without any explanation as to her backstory. I'm sure we'll get to it later in the season, but you can't drop that name without a reason.
I would agree with that.
And I would agree. I would agree wholly.
Yeah,
Yes.
And I think that we said something very similar.
we did.
And
We
now
did.
she's got relatives too, which is blowing up that family like crazy.
Yes, it is. So
Yeah. So few things there that he mentioned. I heard it speculated about the whole Ponfar thing, and although they seem to go into a, like, I don't know, into heat during Ponfar, there's nothing to say that they can't have sex when they're not in Ponfar. So, that's it. It hasn't been discounted that, it's like they have sex for, a few weeks every 7 years, right? That would kind of be, not the greatest marriage.
And that's a good point. I mean, it's Ponfar is mainly for reproduction, whereas I
Right.
guess, they can be sexual beings outside of Ponfar.
Yeah. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that it doesn't preclude that that they can't have sex outside of Ponfar.
well, and the argument people made was, well, you never saw Sarek and Amanda doing that, and I would go,
Right.
well,
Back in the 60s, you weren't going to see that.
well,
thing.
right.
Exactly.
But every time we saw them, they were in public. We didn't get to see too many of Sarek and Amanda at the house. And I would say even the most reserved couples are probably a little more touchy-feely when it's just them in their personal space. Vulcan stoicism notwithstanding.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, now I will agree on her not acting very Vulcan. She seemed very un-Vulcan like, but that could have been, for all we know, maybe she was in Ponfar. I don't know. Or maybe, who knows? We talked about the whole 3 crew members thing. I know, James, you agreed.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So we're on that now. The Kelpian warp ships, I think they were Baul ships that were manned by Kelpians. So I think you're half right with that one. So that's, but they're kind of like truncating it a little bit by saying it was Kelpian versus saying it was Baul. So
Yeah, because did the Baul actually join the Federation, or was it just the Kelpians?
well, it was I believe they both did, but
Okay.
they didn't join by this time, according to Admiral Vance in Discovery. They hadn't joined until the 25th century, so they're still a separate thing. Yeah, so
Because maybe it took them that long to get their internal politics sorted out.
yeah, and of course, Lon, Noonien-Singh, they still haven't really explained the whole Noonien-Singh part. They could, so far, what we've seen in the first 4 episodes, there's nothing about her that whiffs of a descendant of Khan. There's nothing there. We've heard her Gorn backstory and gotten a good sampling of it in this episode, but there's nothing there that says she's been why she's like an offspring of Khan. There was a little bit mentioned in the previous episode, but there's still nothing as to why. So that's my take. But anyway,
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I have to disagree with the Nurse Chapel situation there. She wasn't really fleshed out in TOS, so we really didn't know too much about her or her past.
And we saw some flashes of some sort of sassiness. I would still say that, again, we are far different as young folks as we are when we get older. So it's quite possible for her to be more playful or more direct than, years later as she's been worn down by her years of service.
And that we also, again, we don't have the social taboos of the 60s.
That's very true.
That's what I was about to say, is that I'm thinking when you say that Chapel doesn't act like she did in the 60s, my answer would be, yeah.
Exactly.
because I think there's an intentional desire to keep her away from acting that way, because, I mean, she kind of doted on Spock, and there wasn't really much more that you got to see. So I think the writers are intentionally giving her a character and fleshing it out, and making her sassy and making her direct and things like that, and yet keeping that kind of playfulness with Spock. Like, there's obviously some flirting going on. And I think that's good. I think what they're doing with the character is good. So it may not be a 1-for-1, relationship there, but I don't really care. So that's my take.
Well, and I would say you could take some of the stuff we're seeing manifested, by inference from the original series, that if you take some of the behaviors that you saw Nurse Chapel demonstrate then, you could infer, in my mind, quite logically, that she would be the sort of things we've seen manifest in Strange New Worlds.
Right.
She just
I
didn't.
agree.
She just didn't get enough screen time and enough character play in the old sick bay to actually flesh that out.
Right. She was more just eye candy.
Yeah, exactly. And let's face it, Roddenberry's wife / girlfriend. So
yeah. Well, and
that was part of it.
Hey, you could make the same argument about Pike, because what did he say in The Cage? I'm not used to seeing women on the bridge.
Absolutely.
And now he's hip deep in them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's completely a different thing. But it's like, what are you gonna do? I mean, that's a part of the 1960s that
right
we want to throw away.
And that's, well, it's also something we've said, that the difference between episodic and serialized and the way they make TV now versus the way they make TV then this is a change. I mean, this is our changes as a society, our changes is the way they make TV. So it just is one of those things that is a fact now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got more.
We've got more.
We do.
Let's see. James, do you want to read this one?
I can read this one. So
Yeah,
let's
do it.
This is his feedback for Children of the Comet. I rate Children of the Comet 9.6 out of 10 Vulcan pep talks. This is a very solid episode of darn good Trek. His yeses are: opening with Uhura's log was a nice touch, and indeed the whole episode was told from her perspective, which I enjoyed. I smiled at the hazing of Uhura by Ortega and how Pike laughed at her dress uniform when she came to his quarters. Speaking of which, the scene of the crew sharing a meal in Pike's quarters was warm and a pleasure to see. We were introduced to Chief Engineer Hemmer in this episode, and I'm eager to learn more about how the Enar eventually integrated into Andorian/Federation society following Enterprise. I loved how later on the comet Uhura had to save the away team, and she used her singing and linguistic math knowledge to do it, a trait established in TOS as one of her favorite pastimes. The shepherd Mahanit, which I'm sure I misspelled, plot makes me wonder if the original humanoid species that seeded the galaxy per the TNG episode The Chase used devices like this comet to spread their DNA to different worlds. In my headcanon, that's what we were seeing. His no is I did not like the dress cadet uniform. Looks like something out of the late 24th century. The uniform itself was really nice, but it didn't fit the period one bit and really distracted me from the story. Why did Sam touch the object on the comet? He should know better. I know the Shepard makeup was real rather than CGI, per the Ready Room, but it looks really fake to me. This is minor, but I don't like Spock's sideburns. They're way too long and narrow. And his
that's
and
what
his
we
not
always
agree
mentioned
on that.
before.
yeah, I think. Oh yeah. And his not good enoughs. The way the crew was walking normally on the comet, just seconds after someone remarking that gravity would only be a fraction of Earth normal, was a big goof by the production team. They should have been bouncing around. I don't think magnetic boots would work on an icy comet, so that can't explain their normal-looking walk. The other not good enough for me was how Spock piloted the shuttle over to the comet without being detected. Also, TOH established that only James Kirk called his brother Sam, and everyone else called him George. If that's true, why is Pike and everyone else calling Sam Kirk by that name? P.S. I just listened to the podcast, and I agree with Brian's comment about Nurse Chapel's hair and eyebrows looking odd, but that doesn't bother me about the character. I like her spunky personality and think her energy is great, but there is just nothing about her that reminds me of Nurse Chapel from TOS. Thus, I stand by my comment from episode 1 that she is my least favorite casting choice on the crew. If she had another name and weren't Nurse Chapel, that would be fine. But as Nurse Chapel, I'm not buying into this portrayal of that character.
Okay. Well, I understand. I don't agree, but I understand. So,
And that wouldn't have anything to do with the casting choice, though, either. That would be the writing.
no, I
Yeah.
don't think so either. I mean, it's essentially, a decision they made with the character. And just to be clear on this, the actual hair and eyebrows thing, I don't care about it. I'm just thinking like nitpicking Brian may care and nitpicking Brian's friends may care. but I don't care. The Brian that dominates Brian's brain doesn't care. So but I notice it, but I don't, it's no big deal to me. It's like you could, if you start to pick that, then you pick the rest. Then you start going down the road of this doesn't look like the 60s, and I don't think it's worth it to even suggest that. So
The only nitpick that I have is the Enterprise aesthetic. The interiors, they seem to have done away with the honeycombs that they had put in Discovery, like in the crew quarters and things like that. We haven't seen any of that on Strange New Worlds.
all right, so now we've got feedback from Brian from Colorado again. This one for season 1, episode 3 last week, Ghosts of Illyria. I rate Ghosts of Illyria 9.7 out of 10 vitamin D light additions. His yeses, I was glad to hear a partial explanation for Lon's last name. Still, it's odd that no one in Space Seed would have mentioned, hey, we used to have a chief security officer named Noonien-Singh. I'll keep an open mind about it, but I don't yet see why she had to be an ancestor of Khan. Well, we just talked about it. We don't yet either. So
Yep.
Yeah. Having the Illyrians in this episode was a good Enterprise series tie-in, even if number one looks totally different than they did previously. Well, again, we speculated about that, and if they genetically engineer themselves to fit the environment, it's not completely out of the way that they would look different. So, although they were quite different. I look forward to learning more about her abilities. Having the scary plasma beings on the planetary surface protecting Spock and Pike was a perfect Trek touch. Back on the ship, I also liked that the cadets shared quarters like in other Star Trek series. It was impressive how number one picked up Hemmer and carried him, and the effect of transporting a piece of the planet's mantle was well done. I loved the engineering set too. Number one's personal log was very insightful about her mindset and fears of prejudice against her people. It's too bad she deleted it. Although I found the scene of M'Benga reading to his daughter very sweet, it brings up some concerns. See, not good enough section. Yeah, well, we had some concerns as well.
Yep.
No. How did number one evade medical detection as an Illyrian all of these years? Yes, that's exactly what we would want to know as well. It's not explained. Why are the floors on this show and Discovery so shiny? They look like water. I don't like it. The carpeted floors of TNG and Voyager were better. I'm curious to see where the number one augment storyline goes, but I'm worried it's going to clash with canon in that it's very similar to Dr. Bashir's story on DS9. Wasn't he the first augment to be allowed to stay in Starfleet after he came out? If so, does that mean number one will have to hide it? Perhaps she gets caught at some point after the cage and is forced to go into hiding, and that's why we don't see her anymore in TOS. Okay, well, the cage is before this, so that was supposedly in 2254. This is 2259. And we see in Discovery them going back to Talos for, so, and he knew Vina and all of that. So anyway, that was in the past. Also, maybe Bashir is the first, a genetically engineered human that gets to stay in. With her being Illyrian, maybe that's just a slight, variation on that. But it is possible.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I would also say it didn't seem like Pike was going to come forward with that information to Starfleet either.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, is that it may be swept under the rug as well. So, much in the same way that the stuff for this week was, well, no one's seen the Gorn. Well, that's not true. No one's seen the Gorn that lived to talk about it. Although my question would be, well, why you have Nan there? Why hasn't she, given some kind of, yeah, exactly. We're at the not good enough. Not good enough. The M'Benga daughter in the transporter buffer plot is just not a good idea. First, he's probably breaking many regulations to have an unauthorized person on board and using valuable ship resources, which, as we saw in this episode, can put the crew at risk. He said he can keep a pattern in the buffer indefinitely, which I think is not true. Even in Relics, Scotty had to go to great lengths to make his pattern last. And just to correct that slightly, it was indefinitely if she's materialized every once in a while. So, you have to, in order for her to go into the buffer, you have to take her out of the buffer for a short while, put her back in. So, You guys all hear the dog?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Shorty, by the way.
Hi, Shorty.
Let's see. We've also seen we've also already seen a story similar to this with Dr. Erickson lying to save his son in the transporter buffer in the Enterprise episode Daedalus. However, I can see one canon-related benefit to this plot. Perhaps M'Benga gets caught and demoted from chief medical officer. That's why he's just a regular medical officer years later during TOS. That is very astute.
Yeah.
That could explain it. Yeah. So good on you. That's a good point. Then he says, P.S. I just listened to the podcast and was struck by the discussion about the eugenics wars being retconned to be in the 21st instead of the late 20th century. Has this been stated or even implied on screen? I took the scene in Picard where Dr. Soong pulled out the old paper file from his drawer dated 1996 as evidence that he worked on the Khan project in 1996 in the past, and his trial in an earlier episode when his funding was taken away, also implied there was a past genetic controversy, potentially the eugenics war. I agree it's ambiguous, but I didn't think there was any actual change of canon, not yet anyway, to move the timeline for these wars forward to be in our future. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think about that, guys?
You would think a huge plot point like that would have been brought up in Picard.
Right.
Yeah. And, it only was brought up. And the question is, does Soong look at that folder and think, oh, this is what I could do next? Or does he look at the folder saying, oh, yeah, this is what I did, 40 years ago? I don't know. I mean, that wasn't really explained. It was just, hinted at that he was involved. And of course he was involved. That makes total sense that he was involved.
Well,
and
I'll stick with my original contention that we're going to have to play a little looser with these rules only because, again, it was written 50 years in the past and things did or did not progress in what is their future, which is our now. So you just kind of have to take it with a grain of salt and realize that there may be some gentle retconning just because of things.
Yeah, and I was thinking about something Ruthie said in the last Picard episode that we published, where she was upset with the ICE portrayal, as were you, James.
I was.
And the thought is, we're comparing the ICE of our time and our timeline versus the Star Trek timeline. And the question you might raise, are they the same? And if there was a eugenics war in the past, chances are they're not the same. So maybe the ICE officers do act that way. I don't like that they would act that way, but I guess what I'm saying, there's an element of doubt that gets put in there because there's not a one-for-one relationship there.
To me, my biggest problem was they vilified the entire organization with the way it was represented. These are people that are just doing their jobs, man. And I have several ex-shipmates of mine that are ICE personnel in the actual present that are just doing their jobs. And again, I think Ruthie brought it up. These people are not in this country legally, so
right.
they're doing their jobs of patrolling the border. which we have one of the loosest borders in the world. So,
Yeah, and I was surprised this week when I found, although I know that this is the case, like the Border Patrol, they do a lot more than just the Border Patrol. Like the officer that took out the shooter at the school was a member of the Border Patrol. And in Detroit, for example, there are entire neighborhoods in Detroit that have been abandoned by the city police. And who patrols them? It's the Border Patrol. So
right.
let's not cast aspersions across everyone. And I agree with you, James, that it's when they do that, they're sometimes they're casting it with too wide a brush.
Correct. Yeah,
so
because
that was my biggest issue.
That's the thing that I sort of took some personal hit on that, just because you can't throw an entire profession, painted with the same brush. And, it's just one of those things that part of it is we have to realize that there are, despite your feelings about one thing, there are a lot of very not nice people that are also coming across the border,
right,
and doing a lot of very not nice things societally. And
right.
you can't, just like you can't say that everybody that's here illegally is a bad person, you can't say that everybody that's here illegally is a good person.
Right. Exactly.
And it's one of those things that I didn't like the fact that they're trying to, you're trying to make a point, and you can't make everybody a universal bad guy.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you. All right, let's move on. We got still got a couple more pieces of feedback from past weeks to go. So why don't you take Mike from Cleveland, LT?
Okay, Mike from Cleveland says, wow, this may have been the most Star Trekky thing I've watched in decades. I know many of our right-wing wacky Trekkies have been struggling to come to terms that Star Trek as a property is very, let me repeat loudly, very, very liberal, progressive property. As an African-American male, I am positive I heard the message in this episode was screaming, see me, darn it. Well done, people.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think that it is progressive and in many ways more progressive in this version, in the 2020s version of Trek. So, and some are going to like that, some are not, and I think sometimes they push it a little too far, to be honest. But it is what it is.
Yep.
All right. Last one. So I'll take this one because it's kind of all over the place. Sorry, Ken from Chicago. But it takes a certain skill to read tweets. So anyway, Ken from Chicago had quite a bit to say. You're wondering how hashtag Strange New Worlds could have a blind chief engineer. And then thinking emoji, Spock emoji. And there you have a GIF of Joy LaForge. And then it says, LaForge was totally blind from birth, but he had a visor, prosthetic visor to compensate. And then he says, hashtag Strange New Worlds Hemmer is an Anar who are all blind, but their blindness to visible light is compensated by their biological senses, not just senses humans have amped up, but other alien senses. And there's a GIF there of Hemmer saying they are superior. So, and we'll, I guess, find out what they are. Then he says, I agree. They could have at least a line about not enough time for a shuttle to land. I think that has to do with the beaming.
The ion storm?
No, it was something LT brought up.
I was going to say it was when Pike came on board the ship.
I was thinking it was like, why not send the shuttle? when they're trying to beam them out and you can't beam them out, you said, why not send the shuttle?
Okay.
That's what I think
And I would have thought this because of the ion storm. It would have.
Yeah. And then lastly, he says, if Spock can calculate space-time coordinates to time jump from memory, I think flying a shuttle would be a snap, especially since it's so small and maneuverable. And that is a GIF that I can't make out.
Alien.
Alien
yeah.
emoji. Oh, right. Okay. Well, there's a GIF there with Spock where he says that's better, and that it's right after he screams and and he says that's better. That's from the pilot. But the emoji is alien emoji, rocket emoji, thumbs up emoji, Spock emoji. So, all right. So finally, this episode is season 1, episode 4, titled Memento Mori. It is written by Davy Perez, who's a co-executive producer, and I never got a chance to look up what Beau DeMayo is on the show, but he is co-writer on this. Directed by Dan Liu, who started his career as an editor, and he edited The Walking Dead for several years and started directing episodes on there. And I remember the first episode that he directed. That was actually the first episode that I did on The Walking Dead Talk Through without Ruthie. So it was season 8, episode 4, Some Guy. And also something sad on the show happened, but I won't say it because that would be a spoiler. The description from ParamountPlus.com is as follows. While on a routine supply mission to a colony planet, the USS Enterprise comes under an attack from an unknown malevolent force. Pike brings all his heart and experience to bear in facing the crisis, but the security officer warns him that the enemy cannot be dealt with by conventional Starfleet means. The air date is May 26th, 2022. The star date, I read them out of order, is 3177.3, and the runtime is 53 minutes and 51 seconds. All right, James, what did you think of Memento Mori?
Memento Mori is 9.95. I hear it's like giving birth out of your mouth. Who says something like that? This is definitely my favorite episode thus far in the series. I know we're only 4 episodes in, but this is just really good.
All right, LT, what about you?
I'm giving this one a 9.8 out of 10. The Enterprise will stand.
And I'm struggling with what to give this episode. I'm going to give it a 9.9. Because I don't know, I'll think of some reason why there's no 10, but it's hard for me not to give this one a 10. 9.9 kick-ass Pike episodes, and we get to see the Gorn, and man, are they scary, but man, is Pike a brilliant tactician. And I know that's not a way to describe or give my thing to the episode, but it was great. That's all I got to say.
Well,
I haven't seen this one enough. I'll just say that I haven't because I'm not at home this week. I've only been able to watch this one on the phone, and I can't wait to watch it on a big screen. So, but yeah.
And just to give James 2 cents here, I kept saying that, oh, this is my favorite. This is my favorite. I'm going to stop saying that until we're done.
True.
So far, I've really enjoyed all of them. And I think I want to say that, I can't remember. Was it Children of the Comet that I said was not quite as good as the first, or was it the next one? Anyway, it's been one of those things that I've really liked all of them. I don't want to say which is my favorite because my real favorite may be next week. I mean,
this is true.
Yeah.
It's
all you can say is my favorite
That's-
so far.
That's why I said thus far.
Yeah, they're really hitting it out of the park. It just for me to give 4 episodes a 9.6 or above, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, can you imagine, LT, if we were giving 9.6s to Fear the Walking Dead right now?
No, I can't imagine that.
Is that show still on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
But it's like we had said before, that even though I really enjoyed Discovery when it first started, this has been so much better as a whole out of the box. And I think they finally hit their stride, and this is right in the sweet spot. And I'm just so excited about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think
Absolutely.
that it's been as good as I had hoped. So that's what I would say. Okay. We have listener ratings. LT, we'll start with you.
Okay. Wes from Minnesota says, "Hi guys, great episode. I give Memento Mori 9.9 Pike maneuvers out of 10.
And Mike from Cleveland says, I give this episode 10 out of 10. If you think this is going to have a happy ending, you seriously aren't paying attention.
Brian from Colorado says, I rate this 9.8 Pike maneuvers or Gorn Morse code signals. Take your pick. This episode evoked submarine warfare themes like A Balance of Terror. Yes, it did, actually, from TOS, and the Nebula scene in The Wrath of Khan. And I'd even say a little bit of Best of Both Worlds before they take Picard. Spoiler.
Oh, damn, I haven't seen that episode yet.
I love this show so much. Yes, I do too.
And we finish up with our listener ratings with Jim from Orange County. He says, I give this episode a 9.8 ranking. Another great episode.
All right. So we have our yeses.
Yes!
So we'll kick off our listener yeses from Wes from Minnesota, who says the submarine-like aspect of this story. If anyone didn't get the Star Trek II or Balance of Terror vibes, what's wrong with you? I kid. This aspect was awesome. I loved it. Also liked the Memorial Day aspect of the crew, wearing pins to commemorate the lost loved ones on other Federation ships. Nice mention of the Discovery, which, while we know they went to the future to the rest of the Federation, they're dead.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to think about it too, a lot of people did die in getting them there. So it wasn't just it. A lot of them got there, but a lot of them died on the way. So
Right.
Was anybody wearing a disco pin? Did anybody notice?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I think that Pike was.
Yeah, I think Pike was. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Brian from Colorado. His yeses are the opening shot of the ship in space was very nice, as are all the visuals in this show. When the Enterprise took on refugees, it reminded me of an old TNG episode. The way La'an realized the Gorn threat, took control of the situation, and communicated with the crew about it was impressive. And Pike showed superb leadership skills by calling her out to dial down her pessimism to instill more hope in those she inspires. In general, I'm satisfied how they're handling the Gorn first contact issue, threading the needle based on what we know about from the arena on TOS. Another yes for me was how we got to see a couple of Zoom video calls to other sections of the ship during this episode. I don't recall seeing much of that in Star Trek before, but it's such an everyday part of our lives now. The science in this episode was a lot of fun too. I think Erin McDonald probably had a lot to do in this episode. I met her at Starfest Denver 2 weeks ago. How they used the Coriolis force to detect the Gorn ship, the descriptions of the brown dwarf, and use of black hole gravitational redshift were really fun for this physicist to see make their way into the plot. At the end, I was heartened when I saw that Mabenga gave a transfusion to number 1.
And we'll finish up with the yeses from Mike from Cleveland, who says, episodic my ass. This season isn't bottle to bottle people.
All right. And we return after a little bit of a technical glitch on my side for some our yeses, basically our yeses. All right. I'm all flustered because the technical glitch was on my side, and it's not a good one. All right. Anyway, James, what are your yeses?
My yeses have been pretty much all covered, but I wanted to add that we had instead of boulders, we had bulkhead and overhead shrapnel on Strange New Worlds, which is a nice change, considering that things should be metal and not rocks. But that's kind of a double-edged sword too, because they left everything on the floor. And, in the Navy, we have this thing called operational risk management, where it says, hey, you got something on the floor, that's a trip hazard, pick it up.
Right.
But I did like the fact that they made it shrapnel instead of rocks.
We always wondered when in the shipyards they would load all the overheads with roof boulders. Or maybe it was just the insulation.
Right.
Rocks is insulation, huh?
No, it's jagged pieces of styrofoam.
Oh, there we go.
All right. And what else you got?
That's pretty much all I've got. Except I guess I could add to the like when Wes brought up the submarine warfare type situation, they actually used subsurface terms, as in, dive the Enterprise, and she's like, aye, dive. Thought that was pretty cool as a modern Navy kind of callback.
Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. LT, what do you have?
Well, I've got a few yeses. That yes, indeed, Pike was wearing a Discovery pin for his memorial callback. I didn't get to see what Spock was wearing, but you could do some clever pausing and see that Pike was wearing a disco pin. Like everybody else, I very much enjoyed all the maneuver sequences. This is the balance of terror sort of thing that we wanted to see, as far as you and I have both said previously, Brian, on other episodes, that this is what we get now that we have the special effects to cover more in depth and more zoomy, more pew. And I'm really enjoying it because, as I've said before, this is the way that I always imagined that the Enterprise would move, as opposed to what you saw on the TV screen.
Right.
Absolutely.
I threw in a yes that sort of dovetails into what James said, that we actually got to see them sealing bulkheads and closing doors.
Right.
Which, if you think about it in spaceship type terms, that sealing corridors to make sure you're not venting atmo is kind of a big deal in a spacecraft.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that they actually talked about it in other series and in other episodes, but we actually got to see them sealing bulkheads and sealing blast doors and the consequences thereof. Because when you saw Chief Kyle dive through that one blast door and you saw it close, the last little snippet of when he watched his buddy as the door closed, that you saw him go whoosh off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a detail that drove the point home that it's important to close the doors when you're losing hull integrity.
Right.
I've really enjoyed the fact that Ortegas has become the snappy comment officer.
I have something to say about that.
Even if I'm going to bring it up later, the fact that there's a fine line between being the snappy comment officer and making a snappy comment before you start doing your job. The only thing, like I said, I'll bring it up later when I'm thinking there might be a downside to that, but she seems to be the one that's getting all the really good lines when it comes to stuff that's going on the bridge.
Yeah, right.
I also included it in my yeses, even though I'm going to have to talk about it more later, is I was commenting to James earlier that when Hemmer finally pulled his hand out from underneath that crate, they did a really good job of the practical effects for that because his fingers were really messed up. I mean,
Yeah.
We've talked about injuries and how they portray things, but it really made me believe that his hand was crushed because he had fingers going in directions that fingers shouldn't go in.
Yeah. I noticed that too.
So even though, again, I'm going to bring this up later in another category, I think that the effect that they did was pretty good as far as showing an injury that would be both serious and debilitating for somebody who relies so much on his hands to do his job. And just to throw it in there too, since James already mentioned it, is that I noticed that they used the same dangling piece of sparky conduit wire that we've seen in Discovery and a couple other places. And just to concur with what he said, somebody ought to tidy that up as soon as they get a chance. That,
Probably live wires. That's a shock hazard.
Oh, exactly. That you would think at some point it would make my little heart happy if they at least gave a passing command to damage control parties. Because even though
that in my nose,
because even though they are fighting and in active combat, you're still going to have somebody that's going to have to go and fix things. And that's about all the S's that I have.
Well, my notes are non-existent again this week. I have reasons for that. Sorry, everyone. But I mean, I think the Gorn were well portrayed in this episode. I think that we have the possibility of a baddie that really hasn't been explored in, Discovery or TOS for that matter. And of course not later either. So I like the effect that we may see these guys again. Although we have to worry about canon, but I like that we've kind of been introduced to them. The battle scenes were amazing. I already talked about that at the start when I gave my rating. Pike is brilliant as a tactician, and using their own tendency to never give up, never stop stalking their prey, he used against them. So I thought that was great. Beyond that, I think there were some good scenes, like with Uhura and Hemmer. I liked those. I thought that the sickbay scenes were really good, and the bridge scenes were really good. And I liked Noonien-Singh and Spock in the shuttle, and how the mind meld. I thought that was good to bring in a mind meld. We see mind melding, being brought into the whole, show. And I think that's all that I have. So let's move on to our nose.
No! Well, let's kick off our nose with some listener nose. And that begins with Wes from Minnesota. And Wes says, sadly, despite the background we got for Lon, she is still one-dimensional in my humble opinion. Hopefully that gets rectified.
All right. Prime from Colorado says, why couldn't they raise shields with the transport tube extended? Extending the shields out from the ship is something we've seen in many past Trek shows. It would seem they could just do that here. I had wondered that myself. So in a way, that may have been my 9.9, my 1/10 deduction, because I wondered that myself. Plus, I feel they'd probably have a way to jettison the tube quickly in an emergency, but they didn't do that. I wondered that myself. So, yeah, I think this was actually the source of my slight deduction. I noticed at one point later in the show, I think during one of Pike's logs, that he calls the brown dwarf a gas giant. Although it's basically a very big gas giant that failed to become a star, it's still not classified as a gas giant. But still, he's not wrong about it being made of gas and being a giant in size. Well, if I'm not mistaken, in Discovery, didn't he get like an F in astrophysics or something like that? Was not?
Yes,
I know
he
he
did.
got.
Yes,
Yeah. So that's why I think he got that wrong, because he's just not very good at that stuff. So yeah, that was his one F. So
Well, I mean, he's not technically wrong. He's just pedantically wrong.
right. He's wrong at the exam. So that's anyway. Moving on, he says, one thing that confused me in this episode was why Spock seemed to get sweaty earlier than the humans and was generally sweatier than them. Aren't Vulcans supposed to be adapted for hot environments? That is true. I have no comeback for that. So good call.
maybe he's a Vulcan with hyperhidrosis.
And I would like to say that you are joining me nitpicking, Brian, just a little bit, but I think you're right. Actually, that he did seem sweaty, and that does seem out of character for Vulcans. So,
But he is
We
half
have-
human.
but
is.
we have seen Spock endure high temperatures that the humans on Enterprise couldn't endure. So that's true. I
Maybe the environmental controls at his station were not working.
And he wasn't wearing his, what was that deodorant where it was never let him see his sweat? Was that like shirt?
Yeah.
all right.
All right. So next we have Mike from Cleveland. Paramount didn't trust me as a real Trekkie to get it. I'm not sure what that means.
I don't know either.
Mike from Cleveland. I think we need some explanation on that.
And I'll take the hit if it just that was the way that your comments were parsed out. And if I did something wrong, I'm sorry, dude.
All right, James, what do you have for your nose?
All right. So for my nose, I really didn't get why, if Laan knows what a Gorn looks like, how does Starfleet not know what a Gorn looks like? And you know, I would have figured that that they would have done like a composite sketch or something to be like, hey, this is what the Gorn look like, and that way when like come arena time, Kirk would have said, hey, this is a Gorn. I don't really get how she says she knows what they look like and nobody else does.
Well, and she made a point to say anybody who knows what they look like
Is
didn't
dead.
survive,
Right. But
except
she,
for her.
right. So I didn't really get that one. So I had to put that in my nose.
Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of in my not good enough. So I would agree.
I'm gonna complain about that in the not good enoughs as well. But
Yeah, that's just a big no for me because that goes to continuity. And then I had the ship had a mass conflagration, and we don't see any DC teams on the bridge, kind of like the ORM point that I made earlier. Pick up the shrapnel, take care of the dangling conduits, everything like that. There should have been DC teams just running around everywhere trying to patch things up, and we didn't see this. And it's kind of something that's bothered me since being in the Navy, because when you have something like this, it's just almost chaos as to how many people are doing something at one time, and just bottling up corridors and P-ways and things like that, doing work.
And just one thing for the civilians in the audience, James, DC's damage control.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's damage control. That's firefighting and any other kind of damage and correcting that damage on board ship. So that, and I'm sure that they just didn't have the budget to have that many extras running around and things like that. But it's just something that bothers me as a former sailor. Now, Brian, you mentioned the mind meld, but I was like, it kind of struck me as like they're doing a mind meld when they're supposed to be surveilling their enemy, and it's like, you kind of can't pay attention to what's going on in front of you if you're kind of looking at each other's memories and things like that. So that was kind of a no for me as well. It was almost like a disco moment there where they were just kind of like, hey, we've got this big thing going on, but let's do this instead. So I just feel like that was a little bit shoehorned where they put it anyway. I didn't mind the mind meld per se, just where they were doing it just didn't make sense to me. And that's really all I've got for notes.
What about you, LT?
Okay, well, it's my turn. Besides kind of giving a tacit high five to what James said, part of what I was kind of asking myself about is, okay, so you've got this air filter MacGuffin in the cargo bay that's overheating and is going to potentially explode with enough force that it would wreck the ship. I guess I was kind of going no as to why are we spending all this time working on this thing when we could just, heave it out the hatch in the back. And of course the answer is, well, we need this particular MacGuffin later on in the episode to save us. It just seems like that if you've got a piece of equipment that's malfunctioning that badly, is it a good time to take the preventative steps to keep it from blowing up or just get it off the ship? And granted, as a veteran, but however, as a non-sailor, I did have to consult with James, and basically he concurred to the point of, if you have something that's bad that's on the ship that's potentially going to be hazardous to your continued floating, or in this case, your continued hull integrity in the relentless vacuum of space, it would probably be a good idea to get rid of it. And again, I will concede that it was a plot point, but it still goes back to, why aren't we just chucking this thing off the side? My other no was,
I just wanted to make one point too. I thought it was kind of funny and convenient too that the A3 whatever thingamadoo was the exact thing that is damaged and she needs to fix, and they talked about it at the very beginning of the episode.
Yeah,
right.
And as Brian and I have commented before, I guess this is, Chekhov's air filter. My other no is, okay, so the chief engineer is trapped in the cargo bay with this malfunctioning piece of gear with the cadet. Who's minding the store while he's gone?
Yeah.
Because, my header in the doc says, where's Scotty when you need him? that this would have been an episode when, Ortega said that one of the nacelles was fried and they can't get their drives to work and they can't warp out. It would have been nice to have had at least another shot in engineering with people running around frantically, zapping things and pulling jumper cables across the floor and doing things to show the chaos in the engine room to try to get things going.
Yeah.
And it's a minor point, but it's just something that, again, I would have liked to have seen just to emphasize that point.
Right.
Because we got to see other parts of the ship where things are happening, and we got to see a lot of it in the sick bay, but we didn't get to see an equivalent thing in an engineering space.
Right.
And again, it's a nitpick, but it's still a no. The other thing, while we're talking about medical things, about Himmer's hand, that I'm still going, okay, so he's had this extensive amount of crush damage, and not knowing how anar physiology is, I know with human physiology, when you sustain that sort of injury, the next thing you have to worry about are clots. That, you've got that kind of internal damage. You throw a clot and you have a stroke, you throw a clot and you can't breathe. It just seemed like, okay, so we know he's really hurt, but then he seems to be doing fairly well at times despite that. And I just thought it was a little inconsistent maybe, because at one point he was passing out and being droopy, but then when he got his EV suit on, he seemed to be a little perkier. So I just was kind of wondering, because when you look at number one's injuries, she seemed to be appropriately incapacitated for however badly she was hurt. And I'm going to circle back around to that, not good enoughs, but that's pretty much what I've got for nose.
Speaking of the EV suits, didn't that hood thing that Hemmer had on, that thing was mashing his antennae, man. That couldn't have been comfortable for him.
That's true, but you got to figure that you've got to have the little hood kind of tucking your antennas in, because I would think it would hurt worse if you got them like hooked in your helmet.
They got to have some clearance in there and make room.
Well, that's why
custom helmet for them.
Well, right, but that's why when you saw Mud in Discovery with magic to make the sanest man go mad,
Absolutely.
He was wearing an Andorian helmet that had
the antennae.
You had antennae spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Starfleet version is they just try to make it universal for everybody, so he has to wear his little hoodie to keep everything tucked in place. Of course, the realist in me says, well, that's also so they didn't have to put him in the wig and do less makeup for that scene. But I'm trying to, keep my positive outlook on things.
Right. I don't really have any no's, so we'll move on to our not good enough section. And who wants to hear Hold Your Horses? Anybody?
Oh, we got to play it.
Hello, this is Captain Tilly. What the hell? What the hell? Hold your horses.
And again, these will be fixed in post, but... No!
I guess I'll start it with Wes from Minnesota. I didn't like how the Enterprise pulled the trick off, but after seeing the Ready Room, it made sense now. After all, it wasn't good enough without scientific context. Thank you, Dr. McDonald, for that.
And I'll just say, I haven't had a chance to watch the Ready Room yet, so I guess I'll hear more about it in Wes's news report.
You should, because you get a whole section with Dr. McDonald explaining about brown dwarfs and black holes and event horizons and all that exciting physics stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a chance to watch that last couple days. So, All right.
So next up is Brian from Colorado. And he says, when Dr. Mabenga says archaeological medicine to Nurse Chapel, that was like fingers on a chalkboard to me. The term doesn't make any sense at all. If he'd have called it field medicine, primitive medicine, historical medicine, etc., that would have been fine, but there's nothing archaeological about what they did. Plus, after that line, it was really odd that Nurse Chapel just watching him and others do the stitching. I thought she was going to do it. Another not good enough for me was when Himmer said the warp core was under 110 degrees. That doesn't seem nearly hot enough. And of course, he slid a PS in there. He goes, it's really difficult for me to make the Friday deadlines, but hopefully this one squeaked in. And the answer is yes, it did.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it did. So we're actually recording on Saturday, and I had to move it back, and I was waiting for a part to come, and it never came. So we're recording anyway. But
and just to sidebar there, Brian from Colorado, that's part of the reason that I missed out on a lot of Discovery feedback and a lot of Picard feedback, because with my new gig, the Friday deadline was just extremely hard for me to hit because of being at work, leaving work, and driving home, and all the things that I have to do in familial obligations on Fridays. So,
yeah. And yet, you know that if you send in the feedback later, we'll cover
read it eventually.
Absolutely.
We promise.
So there's nothing from stopping you sending in the feedback. But now there's no need to send in the feedback because you're the host of it.
Because I'm here.
Yes. Yes. You don't have to worry about it. You're covered.
So, and just the last one, I'll go ahead and grab that. It's Mike from Cleveland, who says, Uhura has too much plot coverage for me to ever believe she is in real danger.
Definitely agreed on that. I mean, she's a main character in TOS, so we know she's not gonna die.
Yeah, and we know that about most of these characters. The key is at least give us the illusion that something is bad going to happen.
And it is fun.
Oh, yeah.
All right, James, what not good enoughs do you have?
All right. So for mine, I was hoping they would actually show some of the actual Gorn. I know the crew probably will never see him for canon purposes, but for us as omniscient observers, I think they could have given us a shot of the Gorn ship's interiors and things like that, and actually see what the effects are for the Gorn that they use. At the same time, though, I feel like they're going to probably have a reveal at some point during the season, and are using this episode and as well as La'an's past with them to kind of build that anticipation to kind of climax this subplot. And then I've got Uhura grabbing the cooling rod. And this again goes back to damage control and the basics of it. I would think that Starfleet is comparable to the modern Navy, and everyone is at least basic damage control trained, even the cadets. She should have known to use the back of her hands to feel for heat and not actually touch it. And then I have so were the colonists that came aboard they were holograms? Is that what was mentioned? No, because I didn't see a colonist after that, and I heard something mentioned about the Gorn using holograms, and I thought they said holograms for the colonists.
No, the hologram was the ship camouflage.
Okay, all right, so that's where I missed it. But they never show the colonists again after the attack.
I think there were a few jammed in the background in sickbay.
Yeah, they were there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I was wrong then. And I've got also what's with the chief engineers being pacifists lately. You've got the Kelvin Scotty, now you've got Hemmer. I'm not really a fan of this trend. They're in Starfleet, and sometimes you have to what we called in the Navy fight the ship, which is you're gonna sometimes have a battle. So I don't like that trend of really saying somebody that's that high up, being like a chief engineer, that's not really willing to fight for. I know he said he's willing to fight for their ideals, but not for Starfleet. That didn't really make sense to me. And then I had kind of a little bit of an issue with the transfusion. Maybe if they flesh out the Illyrians a little bit better and see what exactly changes when they're doing their gene resequencing and things like that. I mean, does Una have human blood now? I mean, I'm not really. I don't get that right now.
Well, she only got a plasma, so I think plasma seems to be universal, whereas blood is not.
Right. Plasma doesn't have to be typed.
Okay.
And that seems to be not only plasma from, human, but plasma for, species to species. So I think that's been established already.
Oh, okay. And that's all I've really got.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess that's me.
Yep.
I'm going to have to pick up your ball and run with it about the Gorn. That just for editorial content, I watched the arena after I watched this episode.
Okay.
As I told Brian earlier before we were still in the prep period, this is one of the episodes I think I've watched it a total of 5 times, which is pretty high for me. Normally I'll watch it 3 times if I like it. And the fact that I've watched it that many times already, should go to show how much I like the episode. Now, in the arena, when they talked about, well, we haven't contacted this species before, or we haven't identified this species, that there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, just so there's not a catastrophic breach of canon that people will be complaining about. We did get to see their ships closer up, because in the arena they never actually got. They kept them in sensor range, but even when they were in visual range, you still couldn't really see the ship. So I'll give them this one, that they were actually able to see it. But that still goes back to, is Starfleet that crappy in passing intel back and forth that we weren't able to get a really good sensor log to identify this ship later?
Yeah.
So we never actually, as James said, we never actually saw a Gorn, but Lon still knows what one looks like because she survived. But, as I'm throwing in the not good enough, could she have at least not done a crayon drawing, or, did some kind of sketch to say, this is what they look like?
Yep.
Because as much as she says she's the only one who's seen one, she's obviously not sharing. I mean, if you want to go down the road of, well, she was so traumatized by the event, she can't really formulate a picture in her head without going into spasms. Okay, I'll go with that. But
right.
It still seems to me that, for the good of the service, they could have buckled her down and said, look, we really need to know about this. Or, was her debrief so bad that when she was younger that they never actually got around to it?
Right.
And again, this is just something that I'm hitting on. It's not bad enough in my mind to detract from my overall rating of the episode, but it's still something that I'm going to preach about, because that's what I do in the NGEs. It's not serious enough that I'm going to really ding the episode, but that's why it's not a perfect episode, because there are always things that I'm going to ask about. So that's one of the things I think they run into when you're talking about a legacy alien species that we've known about, that, they've played around with it in Enterprise, which was a precursor to this. And that's still back to, did nobody put 2 and 2 together in the past so that we would have known about it now, where they would have known about it in TOS? So
right.
I still think that they kept it vague enough, or they didn't really put two and two together so that we can get where we got in the end. But it still is strange now that we didn't know anything about them, and we still don't know anything about them.
Right. I just going to add to that, because that's part of my not good enoughs, is that I thought that Lon should have been debriefed by Starfleet about the Gorn. Bottom line, should have happened. Why she wasn't, it doesn't make sense to me. So, you could say that they know very little about the Gorn, and maybe a lot of her memories have been, like pushed back. They couldn't be recalled. But you would still think that if she was the sole survivor of a Gorn attack, they would have interviewed her about it and try to get some kind of intel about them. So,
Well, let's even back that up just a hair. Let's take the Gorn, the name, out of the picture, and just say that anybody who was suddenly found as a floating, survivor who was attacked by a hitherto unknown alien species, would she not have been debriefed about this unknown alien species just to get more information?
Right.
Yeah, they're going to want to gather as much intel as they can.
Right. Because let's not look at that as we know it's the Gorn, as what James said, point. The omniscient viewer. Let's just take it from the standpoint of you've picked up a survivor that was attacked by an unknown alien species that we don't have a name for, or she actually had the name for him. But, wouldn't you want to sit her down and say, okay, what can you tell us? What happened? Kind of nuts and bolted.
And by the way, did she actually name the Gorn, since she's the only one that has ever survived seeing them?
Yeah, but she said, as soon as she said, "Oh my God, it's the Gorn."
Right. It was almost like it's the Borg.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the other question that you would have is how would she know some of what she knows? Like, how would she know that there was a holographic, thing? How does she know about, that they would attack with the shields down and things like that? Like, there were certain details that, if you think about it, it's like, how would she know that? If
it almost seemed like she would have had multiple incursions with the Gorn to have that kind of background with them.
Well, or even the fact she was a kid when this happened. Was she doing a Wesley Crusher, and was she sitting on the bridge when all this went down?
Yeah,
because
that's what
if she was if she's a kid in her quarters, playing with her Lego set, she wouldn't know all of these details.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. My very point. All right. What else do you have?
Okay. This goes back to, since we're going into our profession and our professional skill sets, I've sort of had a lingering gripe about the tactical vests that they were wearing on the landing party. And this time it sort of came to the front that it's a kind of a cool idea that they have the little lights on the shoulders, but I don't really think,
a target.
Oh yeah. Not only does it make you a target, it kind of really doesn't serve a purpose, because they did a fairly good job. And I will give them kudos for the fact that now phaser rifles have weapon lights. That even though I started off my career in the old school when we had to hold on to the rifle and the flashlight separately, that now that it's a modern thing that you have a flashlight attached to your rifle or your pistol, they did a fairly good job in policing, not backlighting your buddies and using the lights to search, because the advantage is, if you're doing that, the light's pointed where the muzzle's pointed. So if something jumps out at you, you can go, kicky pow and take care of it. But the fact that you've got these 4 lights on your shoulders that are pointing in different directions. And I also noticed that one person wearing it, they weren't exactly squared up on their shoulders. So one of the lights is like shining up towards their ear, and one of them is like pointed off in another direction. Like I said, nice idea. Not sure if I'm sold on it. If you are going indeed into a situation on the landing party where you're going into harm's way and you know there's an active threat, you don't want to be, swinging those lights around. And like James just said, the fact that you're illuminating yourself is sort of not a good thing, because then someone will be able to notice you. Because even if they see where the light's emanating from the muzzle of the rifle, that still doesn't give you a good idea where the body holding it is, except for the 4
Right.
freaking lights on your shoulders. And also, to me, it would be nice if you were, say, working on a panel or something, that you've got light that is not, you don't have to hold. So it's not why I suddenly became a fan of headlamps when you go camping, because prior to that, I was doing what I had done for the past 30 years in service. I was holding my mag light in my teeth. It does give you an opportunity where you can still talk and you still have your hands free to do things. But overall, I'm still not really a fan of the flashlights attached to your tack vest. We talked about it a little bit a second ago when we were talking about all the quote unquote primitive medicine going on in sick bay. And I had mentioned it to James earlier as well. What was up with those freaking suture needles? That looked like to me like, like a glover's needle or something you'd use doing leather work or stitching upholstery. That was a big freaking needle. If suture needles are curved, but they're much smaller than that. Just the fact that it's like, are we that bad that we're having to stitch her up with, an upholstery needle and dental floss? I mean, I understand that if it was an actual suture needle, it would be so small as it wouldn't show up well on the camera. Totally get that. However, I just kind of went, because
At least it didn't go in her eye.
That's true. They didn't have any eye trauma this episode, to which I thank them. But it was still, that's a mighty big freaking needle to be sewing somebody up. And the comment would be, well, I guess hopefully number one's Illyrian physiology will help her deal with the scars, because it'll be definitely rough for bikini season on Raza this year. But yeah, the fact that they were quote unquote doing primitive medicine just seemed like that, do they not have any, more tidy, more appropriate sized things? Is that the smallest needle they could replicate if they had to make one? And like I said, and granted, again, from personal experience, having had my fair share of stitches, I just kind of went on that one. The other question back to our engineering thing. So who's the assistant chief engineer? Who's Himmer's second? Because we're assuming that since Himmer was down in the cargo bay messing with the MacGuffin, or more properly directing Uhuru to mess with the MacGuffin, who is Pike going to be shouting orders to in engineering to fix things? Because we know that from, every other series, there was always that point where the captain got on the intercom, whether it was, Kirk yelling at Scotty, or Picard yelling at Geordi, or, go down the line. Because even with Disco, where we complained about they never ever said who was the chief engineer, you had at least 2 or 3 people down there that they knew who was in there that they could get hold of to kind of get a status update. And we knew that things were going bad for the drive system. It just seems like that we would have had someone by name, or at least somebody in engineering that we know is got their, hand on the wheel, so to speak, of who's doing stuff when Himmer's not there? Again, it's a fine point, but it's just one that I think that they talked around that just made me kind of scratch my head and go, okay, so who's minding the store while Himmer's not there? Because I know, like any semi-military structure, he may be the chief, but you're at least going to have what? If you have other watches, you're going to have whoever's in charge of the engineering section when the chief's not in the engine room.
Yep. That's what we called in the Navy the EOW, which is the engineering officer of the watch.
Yep. There's going to be somebody else there.
Yep. The only thing that I have that hasn't been said yet is Ortegas's smirk and comments. She seems to be the chief smirk officer. So every time they go to her, she's making a smirk. And then she'll say, so we're going into a brown giant or whatever. Oh, we're gonna, fall into a possible implosion or whatever. I'm not.
It was the gas giant of death.
The gas giant of death. Yeah. I hope that they don't I could see the possibility of this character being kind of like one-dimensional. So I'm hoping that they give her a little more dimension than just smirking and making, wisecracks. And that's all I really wanted to say. But she, in 4 episodes, she seems to have a handle on that. While I appreciate her, her lines, it's like, okay, they don't have to, say that. One thing that I got a kick out of, and it wasn't from her, and I'll give this as a yes, that I didn't think of, is when Lon says to Spock, do you ever say anything normal or something? And then he says it normally. And I thought that was funny. So, yeah.
Well, I just think it's funny, Brian. I have to bring it up here since obviously the worm has turned, sir, that I was the one that was making all the comments about all the smart aleck eye rolling and comments that Tilly made. And you were going, but it's an endearing part of her character.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like Tilly was cute when she does it, whereas Ortegas is, it's the smirk. I think it's the smirk that gets me because she's always smirking.
Well, obviously I have less trouble with that than you do, sir.
I do as well.
It's just funny that it's the same thing, but now we're both on opposite sides of it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's not a no. It's not good enough.
Yeah.
I just hope that they, don't wear that out. Give her something more to do than just smirk.
I'd also say that she's what, a lieutenant commander or a lieutenant?
I think. Yeah. Lieutenant.
Well, in my experience, she's had at least 2 promotions. The more you get promoted, the more you're allowed to have leeway to smirk and make comments.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, let's move on to our feedback section and open hailing frequencies for the second time this episode. Okay, so we got a voicemail, and it's not from Jeff from X-Force 11. It's from Jeff from Idaho. So Jeff from Idaho we're hearing from, so let's play that.
Hi, Brian and LT. This is Jeff from Idaho. I'm leaving feedback for episode 4, Memento Mori of Strange New Worlds, and also feedback on the series as a whole to date through 4 episodes, which, to sum up, I am absolutely loving. I love Captain Pike. He is my favorite captain. Of that, I have no doubt. I enjoyed him in Discovery and was disappointed to see him leave after just 1 season. And this show is just great. Love the series. Look forward to it more than I have looking forward to watching a show in a long time, Star Trek or otherwise, to be honest. I think part of that is I was very, very disappointed in Discovery, disappointed in Picard. And so I don't know that I had high expectations for this show. I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be. And I think as I reflect on why I enjoy it so much, I'll basically comment on two things and give examples. In episode 4, there's a moment where they show Pike sitting in the captain's chair, and they're, I think, headed towards the black hole in that brown dwarf, and they're being jostled around, and they show Pike leaning very hard in that chair. And in that lean, in that gold shirt, it just reminded me of Kirk in the original series so much. And I think as I reflect on that, nostalgia is to me like a seasoning in a dish. Salt. If there's not enough salt, the dish is bland and boring and flat. And then if there's too much, it's just unpalatable. And I think they have so far managed to nail the level of nostalgia that is just the right seasoning to make the dish perfect. And the second thing, what I really like that they did with this episode is they put different small groups of the bridge crew in situations where they were sort of isolated together so we could see how their relationships build, not just as a total group, but individual one-on-one. So, Uhura and Hemel in the engineering bay, the Nurse Chapel and Una and Dr. Mabenga in the med bay, the bridge crew on the bridge, the relationship between Spock and is it Lana Noonien-Singh? I just love the chemistry of this crew. And just 4 episodes in, I find it very, very believable that they are crew of a starship. And when I contrast that to Discovery, I think those were all 2-dimensional characters on that show. And the depth of each one of these characters, I want to learn about each one of them and what their background is, where they come from, how they think, etc. So if you can't tell, I just am loving the show. I would give this episode a 10 out of 10. I give the series a 10 out of 10 so far. I'm looking forward to where the series goes, not because there's some overarching storyline to be resolved, but just because I enjoy sitting down and watching the show every week. And it's been a while since I've felt that way about a Star Trek show or really a show in general. So anyways, guys, keep up the good work. Love the podcast, and live long and prosper.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for your feedback. And I thought that was a great voicemail. I was in agreement with you on a lot of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you've sent in voicemails before, but please do again.
Yeah. Jeff has sent in voicemails before, but it's been a while. So yeah, Jeff, I thought that was a terrific voicemail, very insightful. And, I hope that, you'll send in some more as we go. As we're recording this, episode 3's not out yet, except for to Patreons. So, but and part of it's because I'm away this week. So,
And I just wanted to say that while it wasn't X-Force 11, Jeff, we did have voicemail from Jeff. So,
yeah, it's funny how that worked. But yeah, the thing, this episode reminded me, as you described it, reminded me of the TNG episode Disaster, where, there's the Enterprise is hit by, what was the name what kind of phenomenon was it? I know Troy thought it was a cosmic string, but it was not a cosmic string. It was something else. I don't think it really matters, but anyway, the way that particular episode like kind of gave you groups of the characters, some of them you wouldn't expect to be together, like Picard with a bunch of kids, as an example. Anyway, it reminds me of that episode and that aspect of the episode. So, but the things you said, I think I heard, I don't know if it was on the Ready Room or if he said this somewhere else, but in an interview that I heard with Akiva Goldsman, when he first got brought on the staff as an exec producer of Discovery, he had been a longtime fan of TOS. And, you've heard him at many, many times where he's talked. He says, my first Trek convention was, I think, 1976 in New York City. And he gets Star Trek. He gets in hearing him talk and in hearing and seeing this, I think it's clear he gets what makes Star Trek good. And he and Henry Alonso Myers, I think is his name, they're hitting it out of the park. I mean, they're really, really hitting it out of the park. Everything that we would have hoped from, Discovery and Picard, we're getting from this series. And, it's only 4 episodes in, but I think it's my favorite. And I think by the end of season 1, I'm going to continue saying it's my favorite. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
And I've said it and I'll say it again. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I am as well.
All right. So we got some written feedback. I'll read this one. Mike from Cleveland, he says, "Tonight, I realized we are watching Star Trek's Rogue One. Most of these characters we want to be able to not fall in love with are headed to tragic endings. We want to be able to not fall in love with."
I don't see the comparison.
Yeah.
It's really only Pike, and he's not going to die, whereas everyone in Rogue One died.
Right.
I mean, maybe he's thinking that because it's a totally different crew come TOS, that's what is going to happen. But it's a normal crew rotation.
Right. And then Brian from Colorado replied to that. He says, "I've been thinking that too. I think some of these characters will have something tragic happen to them because we either don't see them in TOS or they get demoted, like what I suspect will happen to M'Benga." And Mike, the M'Benga thing, I think you may have, something with that. I don't know for sure if that's what's going to happen. Maybe he becomes a specialist in Vulcan physiology or something like that. So,
Well, and I was thinking that when he was no longer chief medical officer, it might have been a situation where when McCoy came on board, that McCoy was a more senior doctor.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of, well, we're not going to fire you, but we're going to replace department heads because now we've got somebody who's more, more experienced, more senior, whatever the case may
be. Yeah. And like some of them could have more tragic endings, like, Lon could, number 1 could, Hemmer could, but that also, it could be that they just simply, move to other ships. So, maybe they build another Constitution class and they move over to, the USS Hood, or what's one of the other ones?
The Hood or the Congo or the Potemkin or the Lexington.
Right.
or
Yeah.
or God help us, the Defiant.
Yeah, I was thinking the Defiant, and I'm like, no, I don't want to wish that on them. Yeah.
But that would explain why we never saw
Yeah,
them.
they were all on
it would.
Defiant.
It would. They're all on Defiant, yeah. Yeah, definitely not the Constellation either.
Well, it's the same thing that I've said for years, is that a lot of people were going, well, this isn't quite the Star Trek I think it should be. And I said, well, you're talking about, we've always been on the Enterprise, and we don't know if that assignment is representative of the entire fleet. And again, since he's here, that's like saying, well, this ship that's assigned to the Med is representative of everything in the Navy, when a Med cruise is not the same as
Pack cruise.
your South Pacific or your Indian Ocean or somewhere else, or North Atlantic, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole lot more Starfleet that we don't get to see that may be doing other things, and it may be a completely different vibe than what we're used to, only because we've only seen primarily one ship.
Right.
So
this bit of feedback got missed, but I was able to catch it on the backside before we recorded. So this is Rick from Cleveland. So LT, why don't you read that one?
I will. And just for, like I said, sorry we didn't get yours parsed out, Rick, but we're getting it now. So he starts off by saying, this show continues to set the bar higher and higher. I rate this episode 9.8 World War II submarine movies out of 10. And he says, I do have great memories of watching old World War II submarine movies on weekend afternoons as a kid. Run Silent, Run Deep, The Enemy Below, classics. This episode was that, crossed with Balance of Terror meets Predator and Jaws. What they did with the Gorn was great, portraying them as relentless killing machines, with Lon being the Quint to their Jaws. which is a pretty good analogy.
Except Quint dies.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe it should be Hooper or Cooper. What was that guy's? What was the diver's name?
Hooper. He goes, a few hold your horses. First, Lon was one of the ones who called out the need for a red alert. She was on the Enterprise, not in the tube when she did. After it is revealed that they cannot raise shields because of the tube, she's suddenly out in the tube looking out the window. That's a good point. He says, hold your horses on the memorial pins. Not on the pins themselves. I love the idea of them, but on the fact that none of them are legible during the episode. I paused on the best of close-ups on a 60-inch UHD screen and couldn't make out the ship names. I suppose it doesn't matter, but it would have been nice to have done some nerd research. He said, I really wanted to see if Spock or Pike's pin was a Discovery.
And supposedly they were, and yeah, I don't know why you couldn't see them. I'm not saying I don't know why you couldn't see them. I'm saying for some reason you couldn't see them. But I mean, mind you, I was watching it on my iPhone, so I couldn't, I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. But you could tell that it wasn't in focus enough to see it.
Right. And I will say that the fact that I knew that it was Discovery on Pike's pen was just a little bit of detective work on my part, because you could look at the name and see that the arc of the name on his pen was fairly long.
Yeah.
You could just barely read it.
Yeah.
And then I went back and there was a website that confirmed that it was a Discovery pen. So
yeah, I saw a picture from a website that mentioned that it was Discovery. So
right.
Yeah.
So he goes on to say, finally, hold your horses on M'Benga's blood transfusion to Una. We have now established she is not human. At least give me a line of dialogue explaining that she is compatible. And again, we hit on that. So there's somebody else who said the same thing we did. And as to that, he gives a big no on Spock sweating. Spock would not be sweating as early on as his human crewmates. He was raised on Vulcan with temps much higher than Earth.
Yep.
One thing I can tell you as a former engineer, in the Navy, being in 120 degree heat with relative humidity of over 100%, I sweat like a pig. So, and I was in a Navy engine room for about 6 years. So sometimes you just can't adjust to that kind of condition.
And
And I think we have seen Spock sweat. So he does sweat. That is something I think we've seen. I can't remember where we've seen him sweat, but I seem to remember we've seen him sweat. Probably in some TOS episode. But
yep.
that said, he is supposed to be able to withstand harsher temperatures than a regular human, right?
Yep.
His half Vulcan physiology should withstand higher temperature changes. So, all right, continue.
Okay, he goes on to say, yes for Pike. This guy, wow, just wow. Cool in a crisis like I've never seen, and even teaching Lon in the middle of a crisis. Making the hard call without hesitating, but still showing how hard it is in the moment. Forget the old Kirk versus Picard debate. This is my captain.
Amen.
And he goes, yes, for the writers. They found a way to present us with characters in a ship most of which is going to survive, yet they give us real peril in the episode. We lost crewmen, and it has meaning beyond just being disposable red shirts. And the Enterprise took a pounding. Loss of decks, visible hull damage. She's got to put in for repairs again.
Yeah.
And he finishes up by saying, again, this week, I love what they're doing with Uhura. Putting her in engineering and pairing her with Hemmer was fun. We get to see that she is so much more than she was in TOS.
Yep. All right. Do we have any other notes?
Just one thing that I thought was actually kind of funny. In the cargo bay, we had the snowflake crate.
Right.
I realized it was probably a refrigerated crate, but it just had this giant snowflake on it, and I was just like, "Oh man, well, now we got snowflakes."
Well, and I was kind of going. It almost reminded me of one of the crates from the game Portal. And I'm like, are we to the point where we can't put labels, so we just have big pictures on the side? You know,
Right.
I would have been more amused, like you said. It's a big snowflake on the side, so it's refrigerant. It's like, are we going to see a crate with like a big cheeseburger on the side? It's like, oh, it's a rations crate.
Mm-hmm.
And
I also thought was kind of cool was just the title of this episode, Memento Mori, literally translated is remember that you must die. And it's like, wow, that's pretty foreboding right there, just in the title.
indeed so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my last thing kind of goes with what Rick had said, that once again, the Enterprise takes a beating, and we'll see what she looks like next episode. And I guess it's back to the .7s are going to be hustling this weekend.
All right. I don't have any other notes, but I do have some spot the references. Memento Mori is a classic symbol seen in antiquity used to show in Latin, remember that you have to die. So I looked this up myself. And I should mention that I'm getting some of this from trekmovie.com. So it turns out the supervising producer, Beau DeMayo, is supervising producer. So that's what he is. So thank you, trekmovie.com. There are 2 star dates mentioned also. At the end of it was 3177.9. Lon calls Una a monster in the previous episode, and she calls herself Frankenstein's monster. So that's one thing. Let's see. We have shuttlecraft Galileo, which we've seen in the TOS. So Galileo is Definitely a shuttlecraft that withstands the test of time. Obviously, there's real science, and in this episode, as has been mentioned, that's not really a reference. The thing about Pike wearing the Enterprise pin, if you recall, she died in front of him, Admiral Cornwell, when he had to seal the bulkhead, right? So that was a good reason why he wore that pin. This is the first mention of Remembrance Day, so that's that was a cool thing. But of course, that reflects Veterans Day or Remembrance Day. That's celebrated in many countries. I know in Canada it's called Remembrance Day. Here it's called Veterans Day, but that's November 11th.
Well, just to be pedantic, Memorial Day is the holiday for deceased service members, and Veterans Day is for the live ones.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's I didn't put two and two together, but we are coming close to. I guess that makes sense. This episode comes on Memorial Day weekend, so there you go. Hadn't thought of it that way. The pin that Lon is wearing is from the SS Puget Sound, and other pins apparently included. Spock had the USS Congo, so maybe that was a ship he was on prior to Enterprise. Ortegas had the USS Palenque. I think that's how you say it. Mabenga had the USS Cuyahoga. And we know they come up with USS Cuyahoga. It's mentioned in Discovery as well. So that ship went on for a long time. And let's see. The whole archaeological medicine, I know that was mentioned that was a turnoff, but that's kind of like a reference to some things that we've heard McCoy say, like stone knives and bear skins, and so I think that was actually Spock that said that, but some things that McCoy has mentioned, for old timey medicine. So that's worth that. I think
the line that he used was like, "They cut and sew people like garments."
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got. Again, thank you, trekmovie.com. There may be others, and if I come across any more, I'll mention them next time in my errata. Okay, so we play our shipwide announcements. Okay, so here is the news. Thanks to Wes Huntington.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wes Huntington, one of the two co-hosts of the Twin Cities Trekkies podcast, and this is your shipwide announcements for this week. This week's Ready Room focused on Noonien-Singh, played by Christina Chong. She appeared alongside Star Trek Strange New Worlds co-executive producer Davy Perez, who co-wrote Memento Mori. There was also a featurette on the visual effects of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. There was also a featurette on the science of Star Trek with science consultant Dr. Erin McDonald. She talked about the maneuver that the Enterprise had made in this episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds and how it made sense in scientific terms. There was also a sneak peek at episode 5, Spock Amok, which showrunner Henry Alonzo Myers had teased about a few weeks ago to be a romantic comedy type of episode. Here's what's making news this week in the Star Trek universe for all you Talk Through Media Star Trek podcast listeners. We have a soundtrack for Star Trek Strange New Worlds in the making. Composer Namdi Melamad had revealed to the WarpFactorTrek.com staff that a soundtrack is on the way for release at the end of June or in July. This will potentially line up with the airing of episode 9, which is slated for the end of June, or episode 10, the season 1 finale, which is currently slated to air on July 7th. There will be select musical tracks from all 10 episodes of the inaugural season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It will total around 70 minutes of music. Fans of Star Trek Prodigy got a franchise first when the episode scores were released weekly during the 10 weeks it aired from October of 2021 to February of 2022. Fans had complained that they had to constantly buy the album per week to get the episode tracks. However, Melomad had revealed to the Warp Factor Trek staff that the label is working on this. If a solution cannot be reached, physical media releases of the first season soundtrack would be released. IDW Publishing, which has been publishing Star Trek comics for a while, has revealed their August 2022 catalog for new comics to be released. One will be Star Trek Picard Stargazer, which will be the gap between seasons 2 and 3 of Star Trek Picard. Written by Mike Johnson and co-executive producer Kirsten Beyer, the comic will run 36 pages and retail for $5. It will be a 3-comic countdown to the 3rd season of Picard, which is expected sometime in 2023. From IDW, embark on a never-before-seen journey set between seasons 2 and 3 of the Paramount Plus hit series Star Trek Picard. After a tantalizing offer to return among the stars arises, Captain Jean-Luc Picard takes to the bridge of the USS Stargazer. But when trouble rears its head on a once peaceful pre-warp planet from his past, Picard enlists the help of an old friend. Expect this comic August 24th. Speaking of Picard Season 3, we have more tidbits of news regarding the 3rd and final season. Recently, showrunner Terry Matalas revealed a couple of tidbits regarding the 3rd season. First of all, it will be a brand new villain. A fan had asked him on Twitter who it would be, and Terry Matalas says it is a new character, played by someone you've seen 1,000,000 times before, someone I've always wanted to work with. And wow, you're not ready. Several other fans had asked him if it was Jeffrey Combs who would be returning to Star Trek. He had voiced a character in Star Trek Lower Decks in Season 2. Matalas said no. Another fan had asked him if it was someone who has never been on Star Trek before, and he said yes, this person had never been in Star Trek before. One of the most burning questions when the TNG cast was announced to come back in Season 3 of Star Trek Picard, would they all be together in a scene? Terry Matalas said on Twitter, using a GIF of Stanley from The Office nodding his head. So yes, we will get a TNG-style reunion scene with the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation in Season 3. Sad news for our overseas fans who go to conventions for Star Trek. Destination Star Trek, which has been popular the last few years with having conventions in London and in Germany every year, was with the exception of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, has announced that they will only run one event this year. Destination Star Trek Germany will be taking place from the 23rd to the 25th of September and will be the one official European Star Trek event in 2022. It is very disappointing to some of the fans who will be going to the ones in the UK. However, there is some good news. You will be able to enjoy a tribute to Star Trek at this year's London and Film Comic-Con in middle of July, where many of the guests that were to attend Destination Star Trek London this year will be attending. Twin Cities Trekkies is a weekly podcast dedicated to everything Star Trek. My podcast co-host Mackenzie Flickinger and I talk about everything from the original series all the way through Star Trek Strange New Worlds and everything in between. New episodes are released every Wednesday. You can find Twin Cities Trekkies on every platform you can think of for podcasts. Our social media handles is TC Trekkies Pod for both Facebook and Instagram. You can also reach us by emailing us at tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave us voice messages when you find the podcast at anchor.fm/Twin Cities Trekkies.
Well, thank you so much, Wes, for your news this week. As far as the parrots this week, yes, we have parrots. And Star Trek Strange New Worlds went down one notch from third place down to fourth place. Last week, it got a 35.1 times the demand of an average show, and that was enough to get it third place. It was just edged out by Our Flag Means Death this week, which is an HBO Max title. It got a 34.2 versus Star Trek Strange New Worlds 34.1. So it didn't go down very much, just a notch, but it went down nonetheless. And
But it is definitely holding in there.
Oh, yes.
yes, it is. All right. To submit your theories and feedback, go to talkthroughmedia.com/feedback, where you can submit text or audio. Call 216-232-6146 and leave a voicemail. You can email us at strangenewworlds@talkthroughmedia.com, or post in our designated episode thread in our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Star Trek TTM.
Okay, if you want to support the podcast, you can like our page on Facebook. That's facebook.com/talkthroughmedia. And while you're there, write us a review. You can share us on Facebook and retweet us on Twitter, especially when we post the new episode is out. You can subscribe to the Talk Through Media YouTube channel, which is where you'll find our newest episode first. You can subscribe to us in Apple Podcasts or the podcast client of your choice, and while you're there, give us a rating or review. You can also go to podchaser.com, where you can rate and review the podcast or even individual episodes. Finally, the best way to help us keep going is to support us via Patreon. Now, we'd like to thank our Patreon supporters: Andrew Davis, Morning Pace, Trey, Mike, Robert Kaiser, Jeff Gentry, Kevin Lyle, Michael Carrier, Aaron Mays, Brian Shiro, Kim Vogley, Kyle McAdams, James Robbins, and me. Just remember, all of the podcasts from Talk Through Media can be found on the Talk Through Media All-Inclusive feed. The All-Inclusive feed includes Rebinge DS9, the Star Trek Discovery podcast, The Walking Dead Talk Through, Fear the Walking Dead Talk Through, Star Trek Strange New Worlds Talk Through, Star Trek Prodigy by Rebinge It, and any other podcasts that we come up with in the network. Currently, Kyle, Brian, and myself are plowing through Fear the Walking Dead Talk Through. And James and Kim are still going at it hard with the Rebinge Deep Space Nine by Rebinge It.
And the next episode of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds Talk Through is titled Spock Amok, and we don't have any information on who it's written by, story by, teleplay by, or directed by.
And we don't have a description either.
None of it.
Yeah, there is no information on this episode, so other than the title, Spock Amok. So, until next time, I'm Brian.
And I'm LT.
And I'm James.
Peace and long life.
Live long and prosper.
I'm not fond of teams.
You're not fond of teams.
Yeah, that was the Hemmer line when he was coordinating with Aura.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.